Okay, today we're going to talk about the cardiovascular system. As you can see on the screen, I have a diagram of the external heart. I'm going to go over these parts just briefly. You should take the time to download the blank diagram of this and practice filling it in. You will not have to know the three arteries here that come off the ascending aorta. You do need to know that the blood's going to enter the superior and the inferior vena cava coming into the right atrium. On the external part of the heart, there are two flaps here indicated in purple. They're called the auricles. They help indicate where the atria are. In addition, you can see some other blood vessels coming into the heart. These are in the posterior portion of the heart. Moving in towards the heart are the pulmonary veins. You have two on this side on the right side, and located on the left side are the left pulmonary veins. These are bringing in oxygenated blood from the lungs. Leaving the heart is the pulmonary trunk, and as it moves away from the heart, you have the left pulmonary artery and the right pulmonary artery. These are going to go to the lungs to pick up some oxygen. In addition, there are two major vessels that are going to serve and give nutrition and oxygen to the heart muscle, the myocardium itself. One is called the right coronary artery, and a whole bunch of blood vessels that feed off of it. You are not going to need to know the cardiac veins, marginal arteries, or the cardiac vein, only the right coronary artery. On the left side is the left coronary artery. You'll only need to state coronary artery. This is going to give all the oxygen and nutrients and remove waste from the left side of the myocardium. You will not need to know the cardiac vein or the anterior intraventricular artery. This is the left ventricle. You have the right ventricle on this side. The apex, or the pointy part of the heart, is usually located in the left center of the chest. There's the aortic arch, and I believe I covered all of those. You need to be able to trace the flow of blood through the heart. We had to fill in this diagram. This is called the heart worksheet. It is also located on my cardiovascular page. First, you'll need to have a red and a blue pencil, and you'll use arrows to indicate the flow of blood. Starting at entering into the right atrium is the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava. Using blue arrows to indicate when the blood comes into the right atrium, it's going to flow through an atrial ventricular valve called the tricuspid valve. You'll locate that. Then you're going to continue on with blue arrows indicating the blood is going to move from that right atrium into the right ventricle. When the ventricles contract, that blood is going to be pushed through the pulmonary trunk through the semilunar valve. In this case, it is the pulmonary semilunar valve. It's then going to come up through the pulmonary trunk and exit out of the heart via the pulmonary arteries. There is a left pulmonary artery, and coming underneath here is the right pulmonary artery. It's going to pick up oxygen in the lungs, and then it's going to return to the left side of the heart. Now this blood is oxygenated, so I'm indicating this left side and the blood flow via red arrows. So the blood is going to enter, and there's not a 9 and not a 9 here, so I labeled them, through the pulmonary veins. There's a pulmonary vein here and a pulmonary vein here. And on the right side are two other pulmonary veins. The blood's going to flow through the back portion of the heart and enter into the left atrium, number 3. Using red arrows, it's going to indicate that the blood is going to flow from the atrium into the ventricle via the mitral valve. The mitral valve is also an atrial ventricular valve. It's a bicuspid valve, but it's more often indicated as the mitral valve. The blood's going to flow into the left ventricle and then not coming out this way, coming up through the next semilunar valve, which is the aortic valve. It's going to exit this left ventricle, coming up underneath the pulmonary trunk through the aorta. It's going to come up around the aortic arch, exiting these 3 blood vessels, and then descending through the rest of the body. You'll need to indicate the 4 valves as well as the flow of blood and the blood vessels entering and exiting the heart. The last thing I want to talk briefly about are the notes, the blood notes, talking about the different components of blood. As you can see, blood is the only fluid tissue. Remember, tissue has a non-living and a living portion. The non-living portion of this tissue, this connective tissue, is plasma. Plasma consists about 55% of the fluid portion of the blood. You do not need to know how many liters it is. There are 2 components of the blood. The living cells are called the formed elements, and they're listed in this table here. And the non-living matrix is called plasma, and it's listed down here. Plasma makes up most of the blood, 55%, if you were to spin it out in a centrifuge, and the formed elements are only 45%. The blood is created both red blood cells and white blood cells during hematopoiesis, which takes place in the spongy bone marrow, the red bone marrow, which is located in flat bones and also the epiphysis of long bones. Mainly, you'll see most of our hematopoiesis taking place in our hips and in our sternum, our ribs, etc. You need to memorize this entire chart. The only thing you do not need to know with plasma is the specific electrolytes that are carried in the blood, but you do need to know that the blood does carry salts, and this helps with osmotic balance as well as one of the plasma proteins. You need to know all three proteins. The first one being albumin, which is created in the liver, and this helps with the osmotic balance of blood, which is extremely important in maintaining proper blood pressure. And also this osmotic balance will create the right concentration gradients in order to allow for nutrients and solids and solutes to flow in and out of the blood depending on where they need to be picked up or delivered. The other two plasma proteins are important to know. One is fibrinogen. Fibrinogen, along with platelets down here, little fragments of cells, will help with the blood clotting process. Now with blood clotting, the platelets are created by thrombocytes. Thrombocytes are the third cell that is a formed element. Thrombocytes make platelets, and platelets, along with fibrinogen, help with hemostasis, the stopping of blood leaving blood vessels. The last protein is called globulin. Globulins, there's many different ones, but they help with the immune system. The other substances transported by blood, and this is all part of the functions of blood, which is listed at the end of these notes, are all sorts of nutrients to be delivered to tissue. It also, the blood picks up waste products, specifically ammonia, which is going to be broken down in the liver into urea. It also picks up oxygen in the alveoli and gives up carbon dioxide in the alveoli of the lungs. The last thing it delivers is hormones to the rest of the body as well. For the formed elements, there are three major cells. There are red blood cells or erythrocytes, white blood cells, leukocytes, and thrombocytes that make up platelets. The red blood cells are basically empty sac containing hemoglobin. On the next page, it describes erythrocytes more in detail. You can see they're flexible, so they could twist through capillaries. They have no organelles. They can't undergo aerobic respiration. They're anucleated. They're biconcave discs, and they're filled with hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is the protein with the heme groups in the middle of it that are going to carry the oxygen. The function of red blood cells is to transport oxygen as well as some carbon dioxide. They're only going to live 120 days. They're going to be broken down by the spleen and the liver. In the spleen, you're going to see the monocytes, which are phagocytic cells, are going to start to break down the red blood cells. The heme group from the hemoglobin is going to be transported via the blood into the liver, where the liver is going to break down that heme group into bilirubin, which is then going to be dumped into the duodenum, and that, remember, as it passes through the intestines, is going to slowly turn the food bolus brown. The rest of the red blood cell is going to be further broken down by the phagocytic cells in the spleen, specifically the monocytes, and those cellular components will be recycled. The next formed element is called a leukocyte, which are red blood cells, white blood cells. There are three of them that are called granulocytes because they have lots of grains in it that pick up the dye when you stain them. There's a lymphocyte and a monocyte. You will not need to know the basophil, eosinophil, neutrophil specific functions, but collectively they're used for immunoresponses. When you have allergies, they're going to release histamine. They're going to cause the blood vessels to vasodilate so they can do their job. They're going to fight infections if you have parasitic worms, or if you have a bacterial infection, these are going to come into play. The lymphocytes are extremely important in our immune system. This is where we have humoral and cell-mediated immune responses to infections. Specifically, these make the T cells and the B cells, and that's as much as you need to know. The monocytes, these are the Pac-Man of the blood. You can almost see the shape of them, and these are the phagocytic cells. These float around the blood and will leave the blood vessels and go through the interstitial fluid to gobble up and break down invading substances in our tissue. Platelets, remember, are the clotting formed elements, and they are created by thrombocytes in our blood. This goes into more details, but remember, you don't need to memorize these. As you can see, here's some stained blood smear. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of red blood cells here. Only a few of the white blood cells, the leukocytes, and specifically, you're going to see the lymphocytes that make T and B cells. Not shown here is a giant monocyte that are the phagocytic cells, and these here granulocytes help with infection. The teeny tiny little cell fragments are called platelets, and they help with fibrinogen with blood clotting. The very end of the notes, go through all of the functions of blood, and you will need to be able to list all of these functions, what specifically do they carry, and also that they help maintain our blood temperature. And that is what you need to know. Stop it. I'm trying to figure out how to stop it. Stop. Okay, stop. I cannot find the stop button for my movie. I need to figure out how to stop this. I wish one of you kids were here. Stop. Ah. Shoot.